Well, let's get pumped for an amazing panel. We talked about companies early stage and some of the amazing things they've done so far, but now let's talk about some of the folks who kind of control some of the purse strings here. So we're talking about the money, which is great, and funding the future of the Valley, of kind of the world. And we have three great panelists here who are going to kind of take you guys on this journey today. First off, we got Neil Dougal, who's sitting right here to my left. He's a corporate counsel at 500 Startups, where he oversees all U.S. and international deals and carries out an investment thesis of investing in promising and diverse companies in the globe. And he used to work at Fenwick & West with me. He's a former colleague, and he's gone on to great things. So we have Neil to my left. Next to Neil, we have Atta Tarki. Atta is the founder of X Consultants Agency, a specialized executive search firm that challenges the traditional consulting business model by offering top-tier management consultants at a fraction of the cost at larger consulting firms. So a great value. And finally, on the far left, we have Amit Khanna. He's a fellow with the mission investing team of the Schmidt Family Foundation. Yes, that Schmidt, in Palo Alto, California. Established in 2006, the foundation works to advance the wiser use of energy and natural resources and to support efforts worldwide that empower communities to build resilient systems for food and water. It also invests in early-stage companies developing technology-related solutions that are aligned with the foundation's climate change and human rights-focused mission, and also a former Fenwick & West associate and my former mentor. So let's give these guys a round of applause, and we're gonna get started. So we actually have, background here, several former attorneys or continuing attorneys here, so they might have interesting viewpoint on this. So let's say I'm a startup, I'm just thinking about starting up, and in my mind, down the line I might try to get some, investment. What are the kind of things that I can do now, even before starting out or right when I'm starting out, that can put me as that person in a good position later on to have a successful investment situation? Any of you can jump in.
I'd be happy to start. So I think what ends up happening with a lot of entrepreneurs, early stage companies, is that you're sort of focused on your very next steps. You have the larger vision of what you want your company to do, what you want your product to do, but you're so focused on sort of what's coming next, can we go to market, can we build our team out, that you fail to sort of lose sight of the long arc. And what ends up happening when investors sort of meet with you, or when you pitch to an investor, they don't necessarily care about your next steps. They want to sort of know where you're going to be in 5 years. What's really the long play here? And I think a great exercise is sort of getting yourselves ready from the start and being able to preempt those questions. Really sort of get in the head of your investors. What are the things that they're looking for as the final outcome of this investment in this company, and really setting yourself up. And be it structuring, be it building your team out, let it be your pitch, how you protect your technology, whatever it is, to really sort of get ahead of the questions that are most likely going to come to you about where will you be in 10 years, or where is this ultimately going, as opposed to where are you now, where will you be, in 5 months.
That's great. And Neil, you have a...
Hello? Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So just picking back off of that, you have to think about how a VC makes its money. It makes its money upon an exit event. So you're looking at an M&A exit or an IPO. And so really, anytime they're evaluating their company, they're not just evaluating what their company is doing right now. It's where it could be in 4 or 5 years. Is there a potential for an exit? Because if your goal is to be venture backed, you have to sort of be targeting your answers towards those kinds of questions.
Right. So we're talking a lot about having a good understanding of where you're going to be long term, but even in the short term, as one of the first few steps you might take, and some of you guys are former attorneys, should people be thinking about law firms early on, or is that something that they should think, hey, I should wait till money's actually coming in?
So I think for outside service providers, if you think about that world, it's sort of accountants, lawyers, maybe sort of specialist consultants. I tend to err on the side of sort of as a maximum, be penny smart, pound foolish, or don't be penny smart, pound foolish. And legal is one of the areas where you could really invest early on. The reality is you can find law firms everywhere at this point, given how frothy the market is, that are willing to give deferrals of $10,000, $25,000 for your first year for legal costs, and it really allows you to get the structure down. So again, the VCs aren't asking those questions that you don't have an answer to. What does your option plan look like? Sort of, does everybody own their shares? Is your IP protected? So I think it's worth a little bit of investment in the early days, especially on legal, and then as you mature a little bit on the finances, just so you're not backpedaling once the investors are ready to take a hard look at your company and you don't have answers to their questions.
And investment in your sort of legal structure up front is really worth it. There are numerous instances where we've had companies in our accelerator. They're working with lawyers who call themselves startup lawyers but really aren't. We just had a company that went through and then they hired Cooley to fix the mess that their previous lawyer made, and they just got a bill for $20,000. So if your goal is to save money up front, you'll be paying for it down the line when your quote-unquote startup lawyer messes something up.
Right, that makes sense. I've seen that in my practice as well. So when, if I'm a company, and a lot of this is context specific, but as a general rule, when do you think companies should start thinking like very seriously about when they actually need to get an investor?
So I'll preempt this by saying that I come from a bit of a different background than perhaps most investors. So I work with, my background is on the legal side, but mostly working with venture capitalists and institutional investors. I work with a foundation, which is sort of unusual for a foundation to really be investing in for-profit companies. But our goal is to put capital into play where maybe other investors wouldn't. So we look at very early stage technologies in underserved markets. So we would potentially look at, sort of green tech in East Africa, which is really not, where most VCs are. So we tend to invest very, very early. We'll take chances that maybe some venture capitalists aren't yet willing to take in unproven markets. So I'm of the view that you should have it sort of as sort of a parallel track to the work that you're doing on the development front, on the team building front. Dollars have to come from somewhere. You can bootstrap all you want, but the reality is, given the market, and maybe you guys can speak to this, investors are looking earlier and earlier than they have historically. They're willing to invest sort of on day one, maybe take founder shares, maybe do seed investing. So I don't think there's any time that's particularly too early. I mean, the reality is a lot of investors might say, we need you to build your product out a bit more. We need you to build your technology out. It's not there yet, but there's plenty of investors out there that are willing to go in on day two.
I would say from 500's perspective, typically if you're a first-time founder, for us to invest, we would need a product to be pretty much close to finished or finished, and we would want some traction. The true value of 500 startups is that we really can put your company on steroids and sort of get you a lot of users very quickly. So that's why it's called an accelerator. So we really need to have something we can work with. Otherwise, you're not getting the best use of our programs.
Right. So another important question, this is actually something I hear from my clients and people who are just generally interested and might not be quite yet linked into the Valley, but how should they start thinking about how to start sourcing the investments, how to get in front of any of you guys? What kind of strategies can they think about to do that?
So again, the work that I do is a little bit tricky. We also invest anonymously, which isn't the best when it comes to sourcing deals. I think the reality is that there's a lot of money out there. It's not that hard to raise a little bit of money. It's just the market is so rich right now, and there's plenty of platforms by which you can raise that money. The question is it good money, and is it not expensive money? I've seen plenty of situations where companies are looking for capital, and someone comes in and says, well, I'll cut you that $500,000 check, but here's the strings that are attached to it. And the reality is you might be in a position where $500,000 is a perfect amount of money, and it seems like it's pretty easy to get that money in the door, but you're not entirely sure what it is that you're giving away. So I think you've got to be extremely careful about where that money's coming from and ensuring that it's not expensive capital. I think there's plenty of resources. I think Neil could probably speak to this better than me in terms of the resources out there for people to sort of crowdfund, people to source capital through fundraising efforts, things like AngelList and what have you. But I've always found that the initial capital that comes in the door is through your existing network. If you're a founder of a company and you're an entrepreneur, over your professional career you've built up a trusted network around you. There's no better investor in the early days than your friends and family and sort of colleagues, former colleagues.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective than most San Francisco-based companies and investors. I used to work with investors and helped some 50 investors invest in about 50 different companies. So to the former questions and this one, I would really answer, depends what you need the investors for, and really ask yourselves, when can the investors add value for me? So getting the investors is not the end game. I know it seems like it when you live in San Francisco, that I just raised X million dollars or X $100,000, but ultimately you guys want an exit as well, or you want to start making money, you want a successful company, and starting to look at that for yourselves and seeing that as a success factor versus getting the investors. And from that perspective, a lot of you guys can get much cheaper money initially than VC money or other types of investments. The cheapest form of money you guys can get is clients. And you could spend 500 hours on going and getting investors, or you could spend 500 hours on getting clients. Not all of your business models allow for that, because some of your business models you have to invest $2 million before you have even a product to sell. But even then, I would really challenge you to say, before you go to the investors, go to the customers and see if there is a business model there, see if there is a demand there, and test that before you go down the line of building a product. And that's one of the first questions you ask is, what should I look at in terms of how to build my company? For me, the first step is not even going to a lawyer or to a VC or anything like that. It's to go and test the market and really see what the clients say about this product that you're in love with, or business idea that you're in love with.
Well, just a point on that real quick. I think that's really important, because oftentimes you only have one bite at the apple for investors. And so some of those investors will want to see the prototype. The same way that Kickstarter now won't let you list unless you have a physical prototype of the product that you're trying to crowdfund. They want to know that there's something viable there. And so focusing on the product first, focusing on your market, focusing on your potential customers and clients could be a key to your getting those investment dollars in, where you may only have one chance to pitch that dream investor that you have. And they may want that.
Yeah, just to buttress these points, and they're all very, very good points. It's very tempting to focus on dollars coming in and say yes to anything. And it's very tempting and very easy to give up points of equity for very low dollar amounts. I've had experience with a lot of companies who sometimes manage to wrangle in celebrities to invest in their companies and give away half of their company in the process. I would say you should think very critically about every dollar that you're getting, the source of every dollar. If it's a client dollar, maybe that's more valuable than a VC dollar. And if it's a VC dollar, thinking about the VC you're getting, not every VC is good for you. If you're a software startup, some VCs are more hardware oriented. If you're a hardware oriented startup, maybe an accelerator like 500 Startups isn't the best for you. So you really got to think about what your company does and what is the smartest money you can get for your company.
Yeah, those are all very good points. And both with tailoring your, who you're going to pick comes with, tailoring how you're going to kind of pitch your investment. Do you guys have any strategies that you would kind of recommend when you're up in front of someone, some partner like you guys possibly? What should they do to prepare for that pitch?
I mean, that's it's kind of like pitch lessons, I guess. It's hard to give like an overall general statement about how the pitch should be, other than if I had to put it down to one thing that I see consistently across our more successful pitches, it's that they very clearly and early on lay out the metrics of their company. They lay out what the product does, what the product is, and what their traction is, what their burn is, what their MRR is going to be, what their MRR currently is, and what they're projected to be. These are metrics that we really care about. And we not only care about them from our perspective, but because we prepare you to go in front of other VCs, we know that they'll want to know that information too. A lot of startups try to hide that information for some reason, even if it's really good information, all the way at the back of their decks. And we're like, why? I mean, they'll go into founder bios for like 5 slides and then tell us the information we really care about. And so we really want to hear that stuff up front.
And another common mistake I've seen is to try to spend a lot of the time talking about how great the product is because you're in love with it, and not enough time reserved for the economics, financials, operating model, and how you guys are going to get there. So even if the product is phenomenal, you guys should be able to describe that in 2 minutes. Otherwise, your pitch is not succinct enough in order for the investors to understand it.
So for me, the pitch that you would give Neil at 500 Startups is very different than the pitch that you would give me at a foundation that's impact focused. So what's kind of unique about what we do is we focus on companies that are aligned with our foundation's larger climate change and human rights missions. And so the pitch that I want to hear is going to be drastically different than the pitch that you give to a VC, which has been an issue for some of the companies we've met with, where they do talk about sort of the metrics. They do talk about, you know, their revenue is important because, you know, they're focused on markets where they want to have the largest impact. But we're very impact focused, sort of impact first, return second. Obviously without really compromising our ultimate returns in our portfolio. But I think it's really important to tailor your pitch to the investor and what that investor wants. Some investors are just willing to cut the check because they want to support you, they love the technology. But as Neil said, if you're going to a hardware focused, if you have I'll give you an example. One of our portfolio companies is a fintech company, a mobile fintech company that's focused in East Africa right now, and mobile lending in East Africa. The story that we want to hear as an investor is the impact that they're having, the empowerment of the unbanked, the impact they're having on farmers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it might be very different than a mobile-focused fund, might be different than a data-focused fund, might be different than a fintech-focused fund. Those are all different pitches and different approaches that you're going to take. You got to be very, very careful about who your audience is and the story that you're telling to them and how it fits into their overall thesis.
So following up on that, how do you stop yourself from being inconsistent, especially if you kind of want to sell yourself and shop yourself around?
It's like being a politician, right? So if you're in the Republican primary, you're telling a different story depending on who your audience is, and then it's a very different story that you're going to tell in the general election. So I think there's ways that you can craft your story that checks all those boxes. Again, going back to sort of this mobile lending company, it's a mobile play, it's a fintech play, it's an impact play because they're empowering people that don't have access to banks, and it's potentially an East Africa play. There's some funds and investors that are focused on that region of the world, and you can tell a coherent, consistent story with different emphasis depending on who you're speaking to. And the issue that I found, including counseling young companies and hearing enough of these, is that you sort of have the robotic elevator pitch, because that's just sort of what you know to do without really appreciating that you need to be a bit empathetic towards a little more empathetic than you might imagine towards your audience.
So let's say you actually hit it off with like 3 different companies or 3 different investors with 3 different investment focuses. What's the best practice and best thought process you should have when you're picking between these different investors? What should you be thinking about?
You have to come back to, what do I want out of this? And what am I getting out of this? Is it just a check? Or are the investors bringing something else to the table? Can they connect me with potential partners? Can they bring customers to me? Can they teach me how to do this better, faster, and all of that? And the more of those boxes that the investors tick for you, and also, of course, in terms of how expensive is this money, and how good are their terms. So you have to look at all those things as well.
And I've seen a lot of companies kind of blunder at this point. So they've pitched, it's gone well. They actually pick someone, it's probably going to do well, but their execution just hasn't followed through. Like they lost a lot of points just in terms of negotiating and all that. What kind of general strategies would you guys have and best practices that you can think of when you're executing an investment?
So let me answer that question by asking the audience. How many entrepreneurs do we have in the audience with a unique business model? See a few hands. Yep.
Few hands.
So how many of you guys have maintained that business model in a way where you don't have any direct competition, would you say? So a few of you guys. I would say I probably don't believe that there are a lot of companies out there. I actually don't believe there is a single company out there that doesn't have any competition, because ultimately you're competing for people's time to listen to your product, understand your product. They could invest their money in using your product or some other product. So what really differentiates you from all the other companies out there that the investors could pick from or your customers could pick from is how good you are at executing that vision. It's not about having the brightest idea and how unique your idea is. It's about how good you are at executing upon that idea. And that's what you could do to come back to Amir's question on what you could do in order to make sure that you're successful is spend a lot of time on actually getting things done and proving that you can get things done so that when you are standing in front of the investors, you could show that it's not just a great idea, but we're also very good at executing against that idea.
Great. Okay, so we've gone through several of these stages now. So you've picked well, you've executed well. How are you going to do your best to leverage the investors that you have? What are the best practices to get the most out of them, basically?
So my experience is that you want to be very upfront with your investors from the start of the relationship, and perhaps even going into the relationship in terms of what you want to get out of them. Sort of not in such a, certainly not in a perverse way, but the idea of I want this relationship as an entrepreneur to work because you have a network that I want to tap into. You have a sector expertise. You have capacity building. You can help me grow. It's a relationship that's going to go on for a long time, and you want to be certain about the relationship before getting into it. And I think transparency is key. I've seen too many situations where an investment happens, your investor's in, you've got a board member, and the first board meeting comes up, and there's complete misalignment between the new director representing the new investor and the company itself for a variety of reasons. Because the reality is, even though you spend time with your investors before the money comes in, you don't spend that much time, and you don't spend that kind of close time in the sort of in the specific board relationship or in the specific investor investee relationship scenarios. Instead, you're sort of going through the pitch phases. In a pitch phase, that part of the relationship is very different than sort of once you've actually gotten married with the investor. And so I think the key is to be extremely, extremely transparent with them from the start in terms of what you expect out of them. Because the reality is that as an entrepreneur, you're making them money. And so you've got a certain amount of leverage in that relationship because they're looking to you to bring about returns in their own portfolio.
Just to add to that, I mean, if you're a 500 company, realize that we have a portfolio of over 1,200 companies. So really, we almost certainly have a company with whom you can realize certain synergies. So, feel free to search our portfolio and feel free to approach your partner who invested in you and ask them to make introductions or whatever. We're happy to do that. We view as one of the key benefits of our portfolio is that every company kind of helps each other out.
Yep, and I 100% agree with what you were saying here because I've seen a lot of young entrepreneurs being a little bit starstruck by the investors and feeling like the investors are doing them a favor by investing in their company. And initially, they were getting a lot of promises around, okay, we're going to help you in terms of reviewing your code. We're going to help you by putting you in front of potential clients, potential other investors. And then after the investment happened, none of those promises were kept. And these young entrepreneurs were not very good about going back to the investors and saying, like, you promised me more than money. You promised me to do all these things for me as well. So to clarify that and be crystal clear about, you guys are going to give us money, but you're also going to do this, this, and this for us. And then have it in the email, have it, if possible, part of the contract. And then keep reminding them and asking them, of course, in a very friendly way, but keep asking them for that and don't be shy about getting that out of them.
And I think what's important is to establish the dynamics in the relationship from the beginning, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't quite realize how much leverage they have in these transactions, in these negotiations, and in these relationships. I've seen scenarios where, if you think about the way, especially in Silicon Valley and San Francisco works, is we have a market and everyone refers to the market. So if you have a new investor coming in, that investor says, hey, I expect to get a board seat. And you say, well, why do you want a board seat? Well, that's sort of the market thing to do. What if I cut $1 million check for you? But I think if you sort of push back and say, listen, we don't want to give you a board seat for the following reasons. Here's how I want to run the company. I want to have control, et cetera. You sort of establish it from day one how you want that dynamic to work. And you'd be quite surprised as to how quickly people fall in line with that. And so I've seen pre-IPO companies that from the start have had maybe a single director. And it's only pre-IPO, as they're gearing up, do they actually build out a real board of directors? Because they didn't want anyone else sitting at the helm. They didn't want anyone kicking them out of their seat as CEO. They didn't want anyone making management decisions, board decisions, and everyone just got in line. It's a lot easier when you're successful, but if you establish that from the start and how you want that dynamic and relationship to work, I think people tend to fall in line.